Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. My guest today is a woman you may not recognize in a crowd, but for millions of her compatriots, Natалья Солженицina's name is synonymous with Russia's turbulent 20th century. The widow of the Nobel Prize-winning writer Alexandra Solzhenitsyn was much more than just a wife and a mother. She was her husband's lifelong archivist, typist, advisor, and closest collaborator through decades of exile and beyond. She helped bring the world literary works that exposed the horrors of Stalin's prison camps and dealt a heavy blow to the Soviet regime. Many thanks for being with us today, Natalia. I know this is a special interview for you, and you're in Paris apparently promoting some of your late husband's big historical works about the Russian Revolution and World War I. I want to begin with the fact Alexander Solzhenitsyn, often called the conscience of his nation, but he also was seen as personifying an eternal Russia based on Russian Orthodox faith. He has a complex legacy, and you are right now the gatekeeper of that legacy. Is it a difficult job?
Well, it is always hard in life to try to carry a meaningful legacy at any time, in any epoch, in any country. This is difficult.
But I guess what I'm trying to get at is the fact that he had many, many admirers. He also had many critics. He said that especially later in his life, your husband's, sometimes his rhetoric became more nationalist. He began inveighing against Soviet tyranny, and yet later on it became more Russian nationalist, more Russian imperialistic. Is that unfair criticism, in your opinion?
Well, subjectively, I don't know whether this was honest on the part of the critics, but in terms of the substance, it was just inaccurate. Whether or not it was honest, well, I am not the one to be the judge of that. It was inaccurate. He was the same nationalist at the beginning of his road as at the end, but he always said, I'm not a nationalist, I'm a patriot, and a patriot is a person who loves his or her country, and that's why that person will criticize the order in that country, hoping it will be improved.
I guess you could say in many ways that Alexander Solzhenitsyn's life was full of twists and turns and lots of irony. When he was buried last summer, it was in Moscow, which you probably could not have imagined during those years of exile, and he was buried alongside an honor guard comprised of elements of the former KGB, a regime that he denounced throughout his life. You must have felt that it was almost surreal, very, very ironic.
No, I didn't find it was an irony of fate. I think it was the way fate has evolved, and I think that he has deserved this, and our country deserves this. We should not think that people have often said about him, well, he was like the oak and the calf. That means that the calf triumphed over the oak. It's not quite like that, because the oak was also successful in many things, but also that calf changed throughout life. So both have changed, and we see the changes in our country, and we see this is the heritage both of Solzhenitsyn, our country's past, and these two things will have to interact in the future in terms of struggle and ideology. Ideology wasn't possible in the past, and this is a great achievement of Solzhenitsyn.
A very big event, obviously, after 20 years in exile in the United States when your husband returned to Russia back in 1994. And I remember, because I was there at the time, he started in Vladivostok and traveled all across the country. Was he surprised by the changes? Was he a little disillusioned? So much had changed in Russia during those years of exile.
Well, you know, he was surprised, but not at that time when we were traveling from the east of the country to Moscow. Because those years of change which preceded our return were ones that he followed very carefully. We, of course, did have an opportunity to get information from Russia. Our friends had quite a few opportunities to provide us with this information. And Alexandra Solzhenyina lived through this. So many changes that had taken place he already knew about. But this was a very difficult yet happy trip. Because once again we were in our country, and there was the language, the warm voices. And all this was much more important than the changes that had taken place.
He was back in the Russia that he loved, obviously, but like we said, so much had changed. Was there some, in fact, by the time, the 1990s came around and the 2000s, some people said that Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a hero of his time, but he had become irrelevant in modern-day Russia. I would assume you totally disagree with those critics.
Well, you see, you have to, let's say, be more charitable and look at his age. He was 4 months away from his 90th birthday, and of course, he has to see to whom he was giving the relay to. So I think that it would simply be unfair. From a human point of view, he did a lot, and he wanted to do a lot. And he was a hero. There are other heroes as well, or there were people who thought the way he did. He invested in his life into ensuring that people could live differently but not kill each other. And that's something he achieved.
Your late husband spent in exile. He was expelled from the Soviet Union largely because of the writings of a very famous book, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. And all that time, he never really loved America. He, in fact, made a lot of speeches about the decadent materialism of the West, a notable one at Harvard University. Did he have those feelings, those sentiments about the West and America right until his final day?
Well, you know, that is not true. It's not that he did not love America, and it's also as false as saying that he was a Russian nationalist. It was not his country, though. He lived the way he could. We lived in Vermont. We, of course, observed a lot of what was going on in life in Vermont. He saw how people were living in Vermont, the town meetings he liked. He liked the sincere, the true democracy at this small level. And up until the end of his life, he tried to show Russians as compatriots this example, how people could govern their lives. He loved America. He, of course, did not like the media, the press, whether it be French or American. He thought it was very superficial, that it was not very just or honest, and let's say to an extent the Russian press as well. So he loved the America in which our children grew up. Our children grew up as Americans, and we are lucky that they remain Russians. But he never tried to, let's say, protect them from that life in Vermont. He liked that life.
One of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's, I suppose, more controversial essays was called Rebuilding Russia, which was published in 1990. And he spoke of a great Slavic nation based on Orthodox faith. He saw Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, even parts of Kazakhstan all together in one Slavic nation. Some non-Slavs took offense at this. Once again, do you think they weren't seeing the full picture? Was that unfair?
Well, we see that this was simply the real picture. Unfortunately, those non-Slavic republics had to act as their people wanted to. Of course, the Baltic countries wanted to leave, so they did. And it was quite clear that Central Asian countries would leave, and they did. And it would have been wrong for Russia to create any obstructions, and it did not. But a great tragedy for Russia, the Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian people, the real tragedy is that these countries split up. Because even up until today, millions, tens of millions of people are tied culturally. And this is a very artificial division. And it is something that is exaggerated from the outside, because the western part of Ukraine is being drawn toward the west, and the east is being drawn toward Russia, and this is undermining Ukraine itself.
When you think of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, part of his legacy, at least for me, perhaps, is his very face, his image. He had that patriarchal beard. He had those wise eyes. He seemed to embody the eternal Russia. And I assume you sometimes looked at him, too, and said, oh, my, that's Alexander Solzhenitsyn I'm married to. Is that an image that is part of his legacy, that his actual face?
Well, you know, when I look at his face, I'm one of the crowd. One in the room, not like his wife. I'm like one who is looking at his face, and when I do that, I feel that he has this type of face that is useful to look at. I don't know whether it was useful to look at Tolstoy, but it is useful to look at him, even when he's not saying anything, because it is a face that will stay in us and makes us a bit better and more serious. This is just this contemplation in his face, and I'm saying this objectively, not at his wife.
And it's a face, obviously, that's going to be with us for a long time to come. You're in Paris, like we said, at a conference. Your son, Ignat, apparently, he is going to also be care-tending, gatekeeping your late husband's image and his legacy in the future.
Not Ignat, but Stepan, my youngest son. He is here with us. Yes, Alexander always felt that his literary successor would be Stepan.
Unfortunately, run out of time. We could talk about your late husband for hours. I know we could. And perhaps you'll come back one day. But thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you luck as you continue in what's been a lifelong mission. And thank all of you for watching this edition of The Interview on France 24. We'll be back next week with more.